Really pleased to have our speakers who joined us on the first webinar. But just to go through a couple of housekeeping items, we are recording this webinar. We'll be pleased to send you the recording and a link to download the slides in a couple of days. Your phones are muted, but we definitely want to hear from you. So if you have questions, please submit them as they occur to you. Just use the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and we'll take questions after the presentation. Let's meet our speakers. As I said, we're really happy to have Mike and Josh back with us again today and to really build upon the first webinar where we started with some of the foundational aspects. We're going to go deeper today, and what better than to have Mike Hoffman. He's a principal industrial consultant. He brings 20 years of experience in oil and natural gas in a variety of roles, downstream, upstream, and as well as some leadership positions. He's held many different roles and titles that many of you on the call probably have as well. He's been a principal ICS security engineer. He's been a controls and automation specialist, and he received his master's in information security engineering from the SANS Technology, where he's still very active today as an instructor. So Mike, I'm so glad you're here with us. He's joined by Josh Carlson again. He's a senior business development manager who has more than 20 years of cybersecurity experience in engineering and business development. And he's supported companies in a range of industries and infrastructure, including government and financial services. He's very active with ISA, and I couldn't imagine two better speakers to tackle this topic. Over to you, Josh.
Fantastic. Thanks, Linda, so much for the introduction. Really appreciate that. So really quick, thanks again, everybody, for joining us. For those of you who were not able to join us for our first webinar, figured I would start off today, since we're doing a series, kind of a quick recap of what we talked about last time. Again, context is key. So the first thing that we did was define what actually is asset visibility. And when, again, our whole vision here, when you think about asset visibility, is an accurate view of every system, every device, every user, and the multitude of other things that are transmitting data all throughout the environment. While an OT environment has a lot of things that kind of look like an IT environment, it also has a lot of things that are non-traditional components. And digital transformation, we talked a little bit, continuing to be adopted and growing throughout this, kind of pandemic time, very, very rapidly, but also it's been growing significantly before that. So we're seeing a lot more remote connectivity and things like that. The other thing that we talked about was a good start on, where to do asset visibility, right? Starting down at that control level there, you can kind of see that the good, better, best. If starting at that lower level of the echelon of your network infrastructure is too risky, start at the top and work your way down and kind of work your way through it. But again, asset visibility, word associations, context is very key. Make sure that you can see the entire asset, the entire infrastructure, the entire system holistically, and not just one small piece of it. We talked about having a proper perspective, right? So again, when we use that term asset visibility, we're not talking about just things like spreadsheets and databases that might come from your vendors or your system integrators or things like that. We talked about having a much more real-time or near real-time perspective of asset visibility, knowing what assets are there, being able to answer the tough questions and things like that. And then finally, Mike jumped into ways that asset visibility helps in your risk management efforts, right? So being aware of where your systems are at, how they're communicating, how to get those pieces of information brought in, and ways that those things can be automated, right? Everything doesn't have to be done manually. We can certainly help to automate that. So jumping into today's webinar, kind of set the stage for you. Why asset visibility is important to you, applying this to your role. So I'm going to attempt to make this a very personable experience to try to help you understand, regardless of your role within the organization, asset visibility is an important topic for you, and you should be pushing for it, up to your management, insisting that you have the best components of asset visibility that you can. And then I'm going to hand it over to Mike, and he's going to talk through crown jewel analysis, finding the gold in the zones of your network infrastructure. What are the adversaries going after? What's the most important thing to do? and then leveraging a collection management framework, making sure that you have enough information to make the right decisions at the right time, using the right people, processes, and technology that you have at your disposal. And so that's kind of jumping into it today. Before we get into it, I wanted to take a quick poll and just kind of understand, for my piece of this, what's your role within the organization? So of our participants today, I'd love to know how many operations folks, security folks, management folks, maybe you're a consultant, you're here from a system integrator or another OEM type vendor, and you're a consultant, or maybe you're just here for popcorn and a good time, right? You're a Jedi master, you love cybersecurity, you love to hang out, and you're here just to learn some new things. So take a second here and see who is in our audience. All right, so let's take a quick look at it. All right, lots of security folks here today. So by and large, security folks, got some operations folks, fantastic. Got some management people, a lot of consultants, and a couple Jedi masters. Fantastic. And I imagine if you're a Jedi master, you've probably played, some sort of role in all of those. So fantastic. Thank you all for doing that and participating in our poll there. All right, so kind of jumping into the various roles that exist, and again, I don't want to diminish or make light of anybody's role within the organization. So throughout this whole process, I tried to simplify it down into what are the primary roles that I would consider if you were to summarize it up in one sentence. Right, what is it that you do in the organization based upon operations, control engineer, operator, things like that. Maybe maintenance person would kind of fall into that operations aspect. If you're a security person, maybe a security analyst, right? What do you kind of do from that perspective? How does asset visibility apply? And then management and up into leadership. And the direct connection here is meant to show you how this can be applicable to you in a very, very real time. And used almost on a day-to-day basis, or certainly maybe a weekly reporting basis. And then from a management leadership perspective, you're probably not dealing with asset visibility on a day-to-day basis. But when things become uber critical to you, or you need to answer questions very, very quickly, then you will find yourself in a situation that says, hey, I need to have this answer right now. And so you're going to expect the people in those roles, the operations, security, management roles, to be able to answer those questions. Because again, in leadership and things like that, you got to answer to the press, you got to answer to your board, you got to answer to your shareholders. So you want to make sure that you have accurate information as quickly as possible. So jumping into our operations folks, again, summarize it in one sentence. What is it that they do? Operations folks are the engine that makes the industrial control system operate, right? Their primary responsibility is for the safe and reliable operation of that ICS environment. Whether you're talking about water transmission, whether you're talking about power generation, whether you're talking about manufacturing of cardboard boxes, it does not matter, right? Their primary responsibility is to make sure that the rotating equipment, that the machines that are generating the power, that the pumps that are moving the water are operating safely, that they're operating reliably on a day-to-day basis, hour-to-hour basis. And they're given controls and they're given authority to make decisions about how those things work. So how does asset visibility connect into them? Well, first of all, let's remember that they need to understand how that entire system is communicating. They need to understand if there's new things coming in, perhaps they've done a system upgrade recently, and so they're trying to adjust to a new level of information and a new level of assets that are there. They want to understand how are those assets communicating with one another. I've got a lot of different PLCs, field control processors, pumps, valves, different things like that, operator stations, engineering workstations, historians. I need to understand from an operator's perspective how these things are communicating. So when I have an effective, accurate view, right, of asset visibility within my infrastructure, I can then look and see, hey, this thing's acting kind of funny. What's going on with it? Not just rely on the control system itself, but have another kind of checks and balances system that I can leverage, right? The other thing that you have is this whole idea of trust but verify, third-party access. Again, with COVID and all the different remote access stuff that we're seeing today, we're seeing tons of third-party people coming in, and that's been going on for a while. It's not just COVID stuff, but it's been going on for a while, right? Where OEM vendors, system integrators have been supporting these systems remotely, and so what we're starting to see though is a significant increase in organizations that are responsible for these needing to trust but verify. What are you doing in my environment? Why are you here? When are you here? Vendors coming in and doing things off hours when they shouldn't be, things like that become very, very important to understand. With some of these systems today, an operations person might also be responsible for the controls, right? The cybersecurity controls that are deployed. So endpoint protection, all of those different types of things, monitoring those systems. We have seen some recent activity around vulnerabilities that are focused on exploiting those different types of security controls. Those applications that we use to monitor our systems, right, become compromised. They become the avenue by which somebody can get in and compromise our system. So again, we need to kind of watch the watchers, who's doing what with what. And again, from an asset visibility perspective, operations folks saying, if a new high-profile vulnerability in a OEM vendor is published, and leadership and management needs to know, how many of those do we have? Where are they? How important are they? And Mike will get into a little bit of this on the crown jewel analysis, right? Being able to effectively say, this is what I have, this is where it's connected, right? And understand what's going on are very, very important from that perspective. So again, simplifying what operations folks do, the unsung heroes of our ICS world. We appreciate y'all, we love y'all. But again, this is kind of my view and our perspective on why effective asset visibility matters to you. Hopefully you agree. If not, would love to have some Q&A time with you at the end. Moving up to the security analyst. So again, maybe you have these people in your organization, maybe you don't. If your organization has an OT cybersecurity analyst, one of their primary missions is for the safe, reliable, looking after the security, of the ICS environment. If you don't have a dedicated OT cybersecurity person as a security analyst focused on your environment, then you probably have somebody sharing that responsibility with the IT team. In either case, having an effective and automated asset visibility solution is going to help in their day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month tasks, right? First and foremost, to ensure that whatever there is from a security perspective in that ICS environment, they understand what it looks like. They're the ones who are going to get those reports that I talked about. Hey, there's this new vulnerability. There's this new threat activity group. There's this new bad guy out there doing this stuff. They're going to look at those reports and they're going to use asset visibility as a basis to say how many of these systems, right, are vulnerable or potentially vulnerable. How many layers of defense do we have between that crown jewel, right, of our asset and the outside world is out there today? If they see a detection in some of the security controls, they can use asset visibility to draw, up the drawbridge that we have talked about before, right? Putting a virtual perimeter and level of security around those systems, right? And we also see security analysts participating in assessments like the crown jewel analysis, content management stuff that Mike's going to talk about here in a second, but also in incident response. Again, from a security analyst perspective, their primary responsibility is the security of that ICS environment. When something happens, not if anymore, right? It's when something happens, how do I know what assets I'm supposed to have? How do I know how those assets are supposed to be communicating to one another? How do I know what's new? What's changed in the last, month, 2 months, 3 months? I need to have that level of asset visibility. You really should not rely on drawings and network architectures and things like that a system integrator or an OEM gave you, 6 months ago, 2 years ago, 10 years ago to say, yep, this is exactly how the system's built and nothing's changed since then. So again, security analysts, very much unsung heroes in this world. You work a lot. Again, we love you. We appreciate you. Very simplified approach here, but again, we think asset visibility is very important to you. highly encourage you to challenge your businesses to look for better, more automated, more effective asset visibility. So moving up the food chain here a little bit, if you will, management, right? Now here I'm talking about the folks who are responsible for the plant or the site, kind of depending upon the vocabulary that you're using. They're responsible, again, one word sentence here, I know they do a lot, primarily responsible for the overall safe and efficient operation of the entire plant, right? Everyone needs to go home tonight, right? We need to keep this business up and running in a safe, economical, efficient manner, right? And we need to make sure that not only the people inside the plant are safe, but also the people outside the plant are safe. Again, one of the things that I think from an asset visibility is really, really important to these folks is prompt access to information about the ICS environment. Again, here you're going to hear the things hit the news wire. CNN's going to report about something. We're going to get a call from some vendor or some entity that's going to say, hey, we've observed this about your environment. We've seen this type of malicious activity. We're going to get an intel report that says there's something that we've discovered about your environment that shows that it's vulnerable or shows that it's behaving in a bad way. What do we do about that? And so they need prompt access to accurate information, not information that came 6 months ago, 12 months ago, not information that we captured one time during a proactive scan of the environment. But we need something that says, what do we know is communicating and working inside of our environment today? They also obviously support a lot of our lifecycle management processes. So, hey, this system's getting old. We need to upgrade it. We need to upgrade it for security reasons. We need to upgrade it for compliance reasons. We might need to upgrade it for, just usability reasons. Old hardware, old electronics, they expire over time. So looking at that and then escalating that information up to leadership to get leadership support, leadership's buy-in, right? And here again, plant management folks, love you, appreciate you. We know you do a lot of work for the folks in the ICS world. And I think that asset visibility to you obviously means a little bit different thing. You're not going to look at it every single day, but encouraging your team, challenging your teams. Do you have the ability to get me information that I need very, very quickly? And certainly in situations where you might find yourself compromised or wondering about third-party vendor access and wondering where have they gone, what have they done, things like that. So that's from the management side, kind of balancing that, and then leadership, right? Obviously, very, very key to how this whole business runs, right? How do we turn products into jobs and into a broader community and supporting a micro, macro, or even a global economy in some cases. So they're responsible for the overall business itself, right? Which is supported by that industrial control environment. We all have jobs because leadership does what they do, makes the decisions that they do to be effective. But they're not out of the loop on this one, right? From their perspective, asset visibility, again, requiring prompt access to information. They hear about somebody being compromised. They hear about that company down the street and some of the challenges that they're facing with a ransomware attack or some of these other types of compromises that we've seen. And they immediately begin to wonder, what do we have? Do we have that same product? Do we use that same control system? How have we protected our systems? And they also, though, in that case, have the ability to provide additional resources if necessary. So with that level of asset visibility, with that prompt access to information, they can turn around and say, hey, you know what? We're going to need to bring in these consultants. We're going to need to procure those solutions to help us with this. And so when leadership has an effective and view of asset visibility, they're able to leverage that information to make wise decisions about where they should invest, whether that's people, whether that's processes, or whether that's technology. It doesn't really matter. But again, ultimately, at the end of the day, they have to take that level of information and then be judicious with it, pass it on to the shareholders, regulators, board members, things like that, right? And again, they're going to be part of that incident response process. So they're going to have to say, why did you do what you did with the information that you had? And fortunately, we can no longer say ignorance is bliss and, oh, I didn't know that was the case. Laws and regulations have prohibited that for a little while now. So, but in summary, I just wanted to say, again, not want to take too much time on this, but just tying it all together. almost every role within the organization benefits in some way from having an effective near real-time asset visibility program in place. Mike's going to talk about a couple of Dragos service offerings that are directly supported or impacted by having an up-to-date view of the environment. Many of these efforts will identify gaps in your asset visibility program. They're going to help your operators, your security teams, your management team, and hopefully some of you leadership folks that are on the call today really understand what it is that you need. So with that, Mike, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. Thank you all again for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Excellent. First section of the presentation, I really appreciated that. Just related to finding out the roles, because that is so important on how we look at and we understand the visibility in our environments. So moving forward here, previously in the first session, we did talk about the sliding scale of security. It's one of my favorite, graphics that we can use for ourselves as the technical folks and also for leadership, because it really shows, kind of that pathway or the journey, if you will, of deploying, security controls in our environment, moving into passive defenses and actually moving into active defenses. Now, on the previous session, we talked about how asset visibility is really the foundational perspective. It's that thing you do once you've identified your architectures, you put in, different capabilities to identify your systems, and then you're getting that visibility from that. But asset visibility fundamentally supports this maturity scale, if you will. So it supports, getting those passive defenses in the environment. It supports proper configuration of firewalls and those components that don't require human interaction. And then finally, and as kind of Rob Lee discusses a lot in the ICS 515 course at SANS, is active defense. And this is where you really have that human analyst looking into the environment, looking into adversarial behaviors, and those kind of things. So think about asset visibility from an operation run perspective, but also as it builds out your security capability. Now, in that, a lot of people will go down that path and say, where do I begin? How can I get 100% asset visibility in our sites? And this is where this concept of crown jewel analysis really comes into play. Now, crown jewel analysis is really about taking that view of what is really important in our environment, because when we look into our systems, we kind of begin to understand and identify that just because you have an ICS device in one section of our plant doesn't mean that it has the same capabilities, the same consequence or impact as a different ICS devices in another site. So why should we put the same rigor or the same amount of focus on that? And it really focuses us on identifying those key and critical systems. So what that does for you then is that with the crown jewel analysis, higher level critical devices will need to have additional controls and security countermeasures on them. And so it's one of the things that you can do is when you're looking at this is as you go through this crown jewel analysis process, it does require a multidisciplinary team. Now, as some folks on this call have already indicated, they wear multiple hats, and in previous roles I did as well. But really, to do this, you need somebody from an operational background, somebody who knows the plant, knows how the systems or processes work. Then it's good to have somebody from a controls engineering background who actually understands the function of that ICS system, and then of course a security counterpart as well. And with that collective mindset, then you can kind of go through the systems properly. And you can also leverage things that you've already done in your plant. So a lot of people have done, PHA, process hazard analysis type walkthroughs and those kind of things. So crown jewel analysis, you can reuse a lot of the good work that's already been done in your environment. And then one of the things, where once you're done with this process, the real outcome is identifying those key areas where you may already have the right controls around, the preventative, detective, and responsive controls, or you may be identifying certain areas that you hadn't thought of before. And so it allows you to strategize and really implement those things to protect your environment. So as we look at this, kind of the overview of the process, we begin with kind of that higher level, the critical system or subsection. Now, this is really that 30,000 foot view, if you will. And these may be, specific providers in the environment, within that industry or the discipline. This could be in a region. So this is maybe a, natural gas gathering wells, could be in a water authority, electrical region where you have providers, your transmission companies and those kind of things. And then from there, you begin to go down from that holistic view. Now you're starting to dig down into the actual systems. So you may have a collection of assets, or it could be networks, that have a specific function. And then from there, you go down into that next section underneath that function. So that, the critical system or subsection may actually be a plant. Now we're going down into what are the processes in that plant. So, maybe heating or cooling and pumping. And then you go down to the critical components that support those critical processes. And that may be, pumps and valves and motors. And then we get to the actual controllers. Now, this is where that interface between the logical side and the physical side has taken place. So, often you hear the terms of programmable logic controllers or RTUs, those things. It's also DCS can fall into this category. It's those control systems that are interfacing and interacting with our physical systems. And then we understand the critical nature of those control systems. Now, one of the things that, for a crown jewel that we're wanting to protect, a lot of times people don't think in the ICS that our data is critical. But in some industries, the data is actually more critical than the device. And this is where you have intellectual property come into play. So if you're doing pharmaceuticals, or if you're doing, different types of catalysts or those kind of things, or even, in food processing, where you have your guarded recipe. That recipe may be your crown jewel, and you definitely want to protect that property. But also you can kind of think of logical assets, the pathways to our critical systems, interfaces required to that. So we think about HMIs, where you can have a remote connection come in and change a set point on an HMI, for example, and then workstations and gateways and so forth. So it's that collective whole around that critical component in your defined process. Now, an example of kind of walking through this would be one for like a water authority. And so this was where, you may have a water authority that may have one or more water plants. And so that is really, so we want to focus on this water treatment plant. And then from there, we began to go into, so what is one of the critical functions of water treatment? Well, it's making sure that the water that we drink meets certain regulatory standpoints for how clean it is. So one of the ways of doing this is ozone disinfectant. Now, ozone disinfectant, of course, you have to disinfect, you have to have the critical components of that. So we have ozone generators. And to create ozone, you have to have a lot of power. So you have power supply units. And then, of course, when you create the ozone, you have to destruct it when it comes out the other end of the process, because it's harmful to humans. So you have that, and then you have liquid oxygen systems and so forth, and cooling pumps. These are all examples. And then we get down into what is actually causing ozone disinfectant to work. Well, it's the PLCs. And then how do you interface with those? It's those HMIs. And then you also have a facility PLC. And so here we have like an ozone generator. A disinfectant system is normally a skid, or that type of design, where you have self-contained systems, but you may have the plant PLC interfacing with it, providing interlocks, and stop-start functionality and those kind of things. Maybe you have to have water flow into that section of your process in order for your ozone generator skid to function. And then we go underneath again and begin to find, okay, those are our critical crown jewels, the skid PLC, the skid HMI, and it could even be a transient device, such as an instrument electrical technician's laptop. And that laptop may be used for updating the program, or may be used for doing troubleshooting and those kind of things. So if a malicious actor were to get on that device, could cause a problem with our critical subfunction of ozone disinfectant. And then also we look into the connectivity, so the firewalls, the routing, remote access, and so forth. And that whole package now becomes our crown jewels that we need to then further go into and understand how, what kind of visibility do we have around it. So again, this is just a great way of looking at our environment and not trying to, kind of eat the whole elephant at once, if you will, but eat parts of it where we can, what is most critical to our environment. And then we move forward. So with that, we kind of look into collection management framework. Now, collection management framework is one of those ideas, a thought leadership that's come out of Dragos in the last couple of years. And it's one of the things that myself, as a former asset owner and operator working on assets, I really got behind this because it really resonated with a lot of the challenges I was having. Is how do I properly identify, maintain, update my collection strategy? And the CMF is exactly the plan for that. So essentially, you start off with, you develop your requirements, and again, this can come through adversarial group behaviors, those kind of things. But here we're focusing on the crown jewels. So our requirements are around monitoring those crown jewels. Then we're going to develop our collection plan and strategies. We're going to go implement those. Could be changes on systems, changes on domain controllers, pushing out group policy objects, all kinds of different areas that we can do that. We can test those changes and then update it. So this is a life cycle approach. It's not a one-stop. We've identified our collection strategy and we're done. No, this is something that's ongoing and ever changing. So one of the first questions that you can begin to answer with CMF is that, are our crown jewels properly monitored? And then with that, okay, so I'm monitoring them. What does that mean? What kind of settings do I have on my Windows systems? Can I detect PowerShell type activity on those devices? How long are those logs stored, for instance? If I want to answer, if I have a question that needs to be answered from something that happened quite a while ago, can I answer that? And then can I detect both network and host level activity? And combining those two is very important. So as we go down this path of CMF, we can, and a lot of times in the engagements that I'm on, I begin to work through and develop it's kind of an as found template. And kind of showing on the next slide here, it does show the template where you go into a plant and you can identify, and you can group this up, and you can begin as as nuanced as you would like on this. But it's very, very nice to be able to group systems together, because sometimes a plant may have 5 devices and may have 500. So grouping the devices per category is really, really helpful. And so again, by grouping the devices and understanding the current configuration of your network, you can really begin to understand what questions can be answered or cannot be answered by how it's configured. And here we see, looking into, and this is quite common, is you'll see a lot of devices have default configurations established. So you may have 7 days of log collection, and and you may not even be able to detect those kind of activities that you're really looking for. And so by that, you can kind of look at it and say, okay, we know adversaries a lot of times are in the environment a long time before they're detected. 7 days is probably not going to work on a lot of our devices. And so from that, we can begin to also identify areas that we have concern. And kind of the next slide talks about going into a little bit on the network side. And this is where, when we think about visibility from an attacker perspective or from a defender's perspective, we can have both lenses in this. And so essentially what you have is, the first thing is, I'll kind of show this graph as the attacker begins to connect into maybe a jump host. And maybe they're leveraging tool, credentials and those kind of things they grabbed from the IT side. Maybe there's credential reuse going on, and they pivot down into the jump host through the SCADA environment. And then from the SCADA, they begin to, either via the HMI software or just by leveraging that trusted path, maybe begin to manipulate settings on a PLC on a remote site. Similarly, on a local plant, for instance, an attacker may leverage a trusted path on a historian, and from the historian pivot down into an HMI. From the HMI, of course, pivot down into another server, maybe a lateral movement, and then go down into the controller and perform some action on that device, thereby affecting the process. So a lot of folks will want to, and it's common in the industry to say, okay, where are we going to put our sensor at? Where are we going to think about collecting from the network? And so a lot of times, of course, you want to collect from a centralized location where you're going to get the most traffic. But here we see, though, if we collect actually from that one choke point in the network, we are going to get maybe some of that command and control traffic or remote type connections. And sometimes that's even encrypted. But really, we're missing out on the traffic or the visibility that we want down in the lower layers. And that's really where we've identified our crown jewels. And this can even be, on the remote side or even on the local plant site. So by putting getting that extra visibility down where we've identified those crown jewels is key. Now you might be saying to yourself, well, I have these connections everywhere in my environment. How can I do this with our limited funds and budgets and so forth? What we've already talked about is you identify the crown jewels, you monitor the crown jewels. You don't always need to monitor everything in your environment, although that'd be great. And that's maybe something that we should all work towards as a strategy, overall visibility strategy. We really need to be focusing on those critical elements. Another aspect here is logging. Now, so we already talked about logging, from the collection management, but here we see about, there's a way to do this also with log forwarding. Now, log forwarding is a great way of doing this, where you can pull or push logs from like your historian. These are Windows logs, for instance, and you can do that from your historian, your HMI. You can push logs from other devices in there, maybe from the SCADA and HMI side. And those logs can continuously be pushed and aggregated up into actually the Dragos site store. And from there, the Dragos site store, you can actually begin to understand and have that holistic visibility between what's going on in the network and in the devices. And having that combined visibility is really where you want to be looking for in your environment. Now, you also can be doing this with syslogs as well. So a lot of our devices don't have capability or have limited capability, but they may have syslog capability of pushing out those. So with that in your environment, you can use syslogs. And like PLCs, oftentimes will have syslog capability. DCS controllers will. Multiple of our systems, maybe switches and routers, will have syslog capability as well. And those can all be fed into a sensor within the local environment down low. So you don't have to traverse multiple layers of your network. So this is just a way of doing this so you can get your logs from your devices, from your Windows systems into the site store. And from the site store, again, you can push those logs out to a SIM where your SOC analyst can be looking at this. Maybe it's a OT only SOC, or maybe it's an IT OT SOC. And this is just a strategy, if you will, of getting out, visibility in your network, in your crown jewels, and also on your devices supporting your crown jewels. And really, as we look at this, then, is we can, once we've identified that, we've worked through these different use cases, we can now begin to go through our visibility strategy and our roadmap. And here we can see we've identified that, we've added, some, sensors for that. We've also added ability to collect centrally those Windows logs, the syslogs, and then we're also forwarding those to a SIM system with 180-day capability. Now, some regulations have a 90-day capability or a requirement, such as NERC-CIP. So NERC-CIP, you have to have logs for 90 days, and that's good. A lot of folks don't have that. But I would recommend even pushing that a little bit. See if you can crank that up a little bit to 180 days, or even best practice of 360 days or a year, to be able to look back into your environment to see, potential, oddities or malicious behaviors actually occurring. Because oftentimes a lot of these attacks are very subtle. They're in memory. They're obfuscating, moving or hiding in different protocols, and to be able to look back and to understand, okay, I'm now saying something, but I actually need to pivot back and understand when did this and how did this happen, to properly understand root cause. It takes quite a bit of log aggregation and log storage capability. So again, this is just as a way to think about this as a strategy to move forward. And so there are quite a few resources that, of course, Dragos has produced in the past. And so one of them I'll call your attention to, of course, is crown jewel analysis. And so definitely recommend, I've just kind of brushed again, kind of giving you just a really high level overview of this, but really recommend you downloading this, going through that, and kind of understanding really the methodology of crown jewel analysis, because it can be done. It doesn't require a massive team of weeks and weeks and weeks of work. It's something that a couple people with different skill sets that can get together, sit down, and really begin to understand, identify those critical systems. The next document, of course, is the collection management framework. And that's one of my favorite documents, of course. Really, I enjoy that thought process of documenting, understanding, updating that collection strategy. And of course, there's been a lot of work that's gone into asset visibility. And so Dragos has just recently released the 10 considerations of visibility white paper. So I'd really recommend you getting some of this fresh new information. And with that, Josh, I'll kick it over to you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Mike. Great information, man. Lots of stuff to digest there. And hopefully you all have been able to participate and look at that and make some connection points with that, whether it's, hey, my architecture kind of looks similar to that, or I think I have some gaps there, and I would like to make sure that we start to shore that up and do some investigation. So again, key takeaways real quick. Hopefully, first and foremost, as I spent the first kind of part of this, you realize that every role within the organization has an applicability tied to asset visibility. Again, asset visibility, the whole site, the whole system, how everything's working together. I think one of the questions I often hear people ask is, why do we need to keep logs so long? And I think Mikey did a really good job there of just talking about the dwell time of vulnerabilities, the dwell time of potential adversaries, dwell time of maybe trusted vendors coming in and doing things, and maybe they've been doing it that way for 6 months, and you just didn't really know about it. So I think that was a really good thing. So again, asset visibility has applicability for all the roles across the entire organization. Number two, prioritize that asset visibility around your crown jewel analysis. So, making sure that I do have, in fact, the correct amount of asset visibility around the most important thing, the crown jewels of our business. If this goes away, everything else comes to a grinding halt. And sometimes it's not just one little piece. As we tried to kind of simplify the message today around water treatment, obviously very, very important to humanity in general, but wanted to keep it fairly straightforward and very simple explanation today. So I think you did a good job there, Mike. Thanks so much for that. Again, asset visibility. Do I have enough asset visibility around the crown jewels that are important to my organization? And certainly last but certainly not least, use the collection management framework to understand visibility gaps, right? And to determine a visibility strategy, right? So now that you see, hey, I maybe am not keeping logs on my PLC for that long, or maybe I don't have my Windows event logs being stored for as long as I thought they were. And we see things like recent compromises in the supply chain that talked about the fact that those folks were in there for several years before they began to execute some of this code and do those kinds of things. So could you answer the questions around that? Do I have enough information to be able to digest that in a methodical way and answer the questions that my board and those folks are going to be asking? So again, hopefully those were the 3 takeaways that you walk away from today. And now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our question and answer session. One of the things that, while we kind of jump into it here, I thought was timely was the Dragos year-end review report highlighted. One of the key highlights that I saw out of that report was that 90% of the engagements that our threat operations team had done in 2020 showed a lack of visibility, a lack of total asset visibility. So again, that's why Mike and I really wanted to kind of press home this topic of asset visibility. So with that, Linda, I'll turn it back over to you. We'll jump into some of the Q&A session.
Terrific. Thanks, Josh. Thanks, Mike. We do have a question that was somewhat touched on, but let's see if I think Mike can perhaps take another shot at it. The question is about the difference between PLCs at the controller level versus PLCs at the crown jewels level.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and it all comes down to context. So you may have a PLC, that let's for instance, let's take a truck, at a refinery. A lot of times you have a truck unloading rack where you're shipping products out, and a lot of times that rack can be down for a little while, and it doesn't have as much of an impact or a part of that. But you also may have another PLC that is attached to maybe a device that's part of doing burner control on an incinerator. And so that PLC, even though again it's the same type of device, where it's being used, how it's being used, and the financial impact of that PLC being compromised is much greater. That would be more of a the crown jewel, if you will. And this may be a poor example, of course. Maybe the truck rack is your crown jewel, because you cannot sell, you can't go without selling product. So it all depends on that collective team working together to understand what is that critical process, and then those devices are really what are deemed crown jewels and really need that extra protection. And that's kind of going back to what I was saying before, is just because we have 50 PLCs in our environment, all 50 of them don't mean that each one of them doesn't mean it's a crown jewel. It's all how in context and how it's being used, and in context with the underlying process.
Thanks, Mike. Someone had a question. They said they weren't familiar with the term kill chain.
Excellent. Another excellent question. I'll take this real quick, and I'll actually post the link down to below in the messages. So kill chain is talking about just a phenomenal paper that Rob Emily and the late Mike Asante wrote on the ICS kill chain. And so that's really what that's talking about, is really taking that Lockheed Martin kill chain approach and really applying the layer 2 attack into the ICS systems. So it's just that really breaking down how the attacks work and the attack paths and so forth, and really showing how difficult it is to actually compromise an ICS environment, but yet it can be done.
Okay, next question. Would you take into account the requirements for confidentiality, integrity, and availability of an asset to assess its criticality?
You want to answer that, Josh, or I can do it as matter?
I was going to say, so I think, that's one of the things that we often hear in circles around operational technology or OT environments, ICS environments, is, do I take in the CIA triad, or sometimes they like to switch it around and make it a, AIC or ACI or whatever. To me, I think there's every aspect of the business has to be looked at. I personally don't like to use it in that way, because every business is unique. And I think the crown jewel analysis does a better job of putting in to light the things that are important. I think that you're always going to have, confidentiality, integrity, and availability requirements, right? I mean, power generation availability is key. It has to be running. It has to be running safely so that people have power. We just, being a Texan here, it was a huge thing this past week, right? We struggled with that. So availability was a big thing. But I've also seen businesses go out of business because of confidentiality issues, where they lost their intellectual property. It wasn't anything magical that they were doing on a day in and day out basis, but the product that they were producing at the end of that process was their crown jewel. It was the thing that made them special. And when that intellectual property was compromised, it became a commodity on the market, and their business goes away, or at least the way that it used to be. So I think from that perspective, yes, you need to consider it, but I don't think that you use the same tactics that you would in kind of an IT world in the OT space. I think there's some uniqueness there. What are your thoughts, Mike?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it definitely has to, CIA does matter, but again, it's all in context. So like where I was talking before about, a lot of times, people will, say the AIC approach. That's fine. But again, if you're in, whatever vertical you're in, pharmaceuticals, or if you're doing, different processes, batch processes where your recipe is, if you lost your recipe, you're out of business. That means confidentiality is really your crown jewel. You have to maintain that secret. And so that's really where it just all varies. It's, of course, when we look at the ICS environment, it's all about availability and uptime. And so around that, you have of course, availability and integrity of your systems, of your protocols, and those kind of things. So it all matters, but I think oftentimes that conversation it doesn't provide anything meaningful out of it, because you really just have to focus on what's important of the process.
Okay, what are the most common attack vectors into a DCS or PLC controller?
Ooh, that's a big loaded question.
Yeah, it is.
Well, I think I think it really goes to looking at what the adversary or what the individual or set of individuals themselves, what's their overall goal. And that's why I think you hear a lot of times here at Dragos, we don't do what's called attribution because that's very difficult and it's very hard. Sergio and Rob have talked a lot about why we don't do that, because there's little value that comes out of the back end of it. I think most commonly, and what you find in our reports today, like Year in Review talked about, over 50% of the engagements that we did showed shared use, shared credential use, right, is a big concern, that entities are not leveraging multi-factor authentication. There's no checks and balances system. It's the same password that was used when the system was built 20 years ago or 2 years ago. It's still being used today, and that's what's in play. I think that you also look at so one common way, spear phishing, remote access, leveraging shared credentials. You could look at the recent supply chain attack. That was a big leverage point that they used, and you see that a lot today. Ransomware obviously leverages a lot of those type of techniques and tactics today. The other thing I think you see is over 80% of our findings in 2020 alone focused on lack of network segmentation. And there was a comment in the chat earlier about, how does system architecture and things like that kind of play into this? And Mike, I thought you did a really good job of talking about where I need to have that visibility, right? A lot of times we kind of focus on the whole north-south, right? I only want to see what's happening between IT and OT. Well, what about that 4G modem that's sitting over there off your historian that has, some remote access from that system integrator that's helping you maintain or do preventative maintenance activities, right? What credentials, what security, what things are in place for that? So if you don't have that kind of what we refer to as east-west visibility, then you're going to have some gaps. And those are things that, again, I think you need to focus on, whether you're doing, collection management framework, whether you're doing crown jewel analysis, either way, you need to start looking at that, find your gaps. Where can I not see somebody doing something in my environment? So what do you think, Mike?
No, I mean, absolutely. I always look at that attack paths and those kind of things from two perspectives. One is top to bottom, and then one is coming in from the side. So, just kind of like as Josh described, and as you look at our year in review reports and those kind of things, and that's really where that SANS paper that I just gave a link to on the kill chain talks about it as well. Historically, we've seen most attacks come through the corporate side into the into the ICS side. And then, of course, leveraging very similar capabilities and the difference that really lies where you're actually getting that compromise to the actual end device, like the activity group Xenotime, for instance, or they actually, created a payload for, that safety controller. So very much it's that approach. So it's properly protecting, again, that crown jewel of that attack path. And then also, of course, it's that lateral leap from, portable devices, shared devices, USBs, laptops coming into the environment, seeing a lot of remote connections these days coming in with other skid packages and so forth. You just need to be aware of that. You may have, properly done a lot of good work around your security controls, around, preventative and detective measures, but you may have another attack path coming in from the side that you may not be aware about. So that's another common way that we're I've seen on different engagements as a way to come in. So.
And one last thing I would add to that is also don't think about, and there was kind of a comment around this in the chat as well. Don't think about everything as a left of boom or just everything they're just trying to make catastrophic end to your process. Again, I think espionage is a big thing. Reconnaissance is a real big thing that we talk about in that kill chain process. People getting in to understand how your environment works, how your network architecture works, making sure that they can document that and then sell that as a product to somebody else. We saw that in some of our activity groups where one activity group goes in and just kind of gets a lay of the land, is like the scouts, if you want to put it in a military type term. They're the scouts. They're looking ahead and they're understanding, hey, what's the lay of the land? How does this thing work? Where's everything connected? How's it working? And then they take all of that information, anything that they've been able to gather, credentials, maybe access, IP addresses, host names, etc. They take all that and they sell it to some other group. And so they kind of wash their hands of, hey, we didn't do anything bad. Well, if you don't have the ability to tell that somebody's in there doing reconnaissance, or somebody's maliciously doing something from an espionage perspective and exfiltrating data out of your organization, right? That's a gap in your asset visibility program.
Thanks, Josh. Nice color there. How important do you consider network segmentation on an isolated system? Isolated meaning no remote access.
Ooh, Mike, you want to start with that one?
Yeah, and so you want to repeat the question really quick?
Sure. How important do you consider network segmentation on an isolated system? And by isolated, I mean no remote access.
Okay, yeah. So great question, and that question almost sounds like air gap, and it probably isn't. But nevertheless, a lot of times when you look at, we think remote access, we think RDP, we may think VNC, those type of protocols. But you also oftentimes, and again, very, very rarely will you find a system that doesn't communicate externally somehow. May not be a user to system, but it may be a system to system level communication. You may be doing file transfers. You may have that historian communicating out to your enterprise side. So absolutely, segmentation, proper segmentation is critical, because it's as a from a pen test side of things, it's very, very easy just as easy to compromise one of those services, SMB, for example, or anything like that, and get into the environment as is going through RDP or VNC or whatever visual type of attack. So always think about, segmentation needs to be thought about, and also that visibility around that segmentation, from what protocols are in use, the directions of protocols, the protections around using firewalls, what kind of rules are in place. All those things really matter. So.
Great. We want to conclude the webinar today and just remind folks that we have one more webinar in the series. This is going to be an actual opportunity for you to see asset visibility in action on our Dragos platform. We'll be covering baselines, show you an interactive asset map, as well as threat detection. So hope you can join us for that. We will notify you when that has been scheduled, and hope that you can join us for that. Thanks again for participating today, and thank you to our speakers.